And welcome to the past. So, in our Wednesday evening study, Bible Patterns in Modern Times, we're going to be taking a look at some thoughts from Messianic Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, his new book, The Avatar, The Return of the Ancients, and the Future of America. So, share the screen here, looking at this last decade we've been in here. Let's see. So, 2017, moving forward from there. We saw in review that June 5th of 2017, on the 50-year jubilee of the launch of the Six-Day War, the United States Senate passed a resolution recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So moving on from there, we'll do a couple review items, won't spend a whole lot of time there, then we'll get to some new material on this. So on December 6th, my daughter's birthday, President Trump announced December 6th of 2017 that he officially would be recognizing Jerusalem as the capital and would be moving the embassy over. Now this just happens to be, as I mentioned in our prior discussion, on the 18th day of Kislev, which was the day back in 1947 when, on the Hebrew calendar, when the United Nations resolution passed recognizing giving land for Israel. And so 1947 to 2017, that's 70 years. 70 years is the time associated with Babylonian captivity, which Cyrus, when King of Persia came in, gave him a release. So Trump is considered a Cyrus figure, just as President Truman, first world leader to recognize Israel in 1948, was considered a Cyrus figure. Folks from Israel came over and referred to him, showed him the passages of scripture, what Cyrus did, and Truman said, "Wow, I am Cyrus." And he was moved to tears. He even wrote his autobiography and called it "I Am Cyrus." So now Trump, in doing this, in recognizing Jerusalem for the Jewish people, is considered a Cyrus figure as well, recognized as such by the Jewish people. To the point where, we had some fun with this at the time we talked about this, to the point where we've got some coins. Y'all remember this? The Trump coins, Trump and Cyrus, to fulfill 70 years. 70 years to the day on the Hebrew calendar, temple coin. So yeah, so all that fun stuff. Like doves to their nest, coming home, quote from Isaiah there. So yay, happy times. So let's see, what else we got? Moving on along here. So Benjamin Netanyahu comes to visit. And on, let's see, this was, move on down here, March 5th of 2018. And U.S. President says he may visit Jerusalem for the embassy inauguration. Didn't end up making it. Prime Minister Netanyahu says Jews will remember the president alongside Cyrus the Great. And so Netanyahu made some remarks along the Cyrus and Trump comparison there. So then on May 14th, we have the inauguration of the American Embassy in Jerusalem. United States Embassy in Jerusalem. There's Netanyahu there. This was on May 14th, which was the 70th anniversary of the nation of Israel. Declared their independence on May 14th of 1948. So there's our 70 again. So yeah. What else we got? All right, this brings us to new material, courtesy of Jonathan Cahn in The Avatar. So, June 26th of 2018. Let's see. Let's call our attention to the Bible, 2 Kings chapter 11. Let's do that first. 2 Kings chapter 11. Samuel, Kings, 2 Kings, 11, there we are. 2 Kings 11, first few verses. 2 Kings 11, 1 through 3. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and eliminated all the royal children, her grandkids. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and abducted him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and put him and his nurse in the bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah, and he was not put to death. So he was kept hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah was reigning over the land. So you hear me referring to the murdering grandma. That's this person, Athaliah. Who is Athaliah? She's the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. She, from Israel, remember the nation split Israel and Judah. Well, she, daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel of Israel, she married the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. His name was Jehoram, and we'll get to who he is. His template is fulfilled by in American recent history. So we showed how the template of Ahab and Jezebel was fulfilled by Bill and Hillary Clinton, how their children, amongst other children, Joram and Athaliah, were their templates fulfilled by Barack Obama, and then Kamala Harris is actively, where we are in our story, fulfilling the role of Athaliah. And so Athaliah, when her son, the king, died, she murdered her grandkids so that she could be king and queen. And she was queen on the throne of David for 6 years. And where the priest's wife, she grabbed the little one, Joash, and hid him and kept him safe in his infancy for 6 years. So what does this have to do with modern times? And again, as we connect current people to biblical templates, I don't want to fixate on the person, just see the spiritual pattern and think about the spiritual forces behind the scenes, God and angels on one side, demons on the other, and the influence on all that. So, here's a thought on that. Athaliah had not slaughtered all of the royal heirs. One was saved. Jehoshaphat, herself of the royal family, wife of the high priest Jehoiada, grabbed the baby Joash, Athaliah's grandson, and hid him away from the massacre. She then brought the baby and his nurse into the temple to be raised there among the priests and worshipers of God. So that was good. So what's this have to do with Kamala Harris in the template? Well, as she is, oh, there's that, look at all that. Those didn't pop up before. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, that's crazy. I don't care about that. Let's try refresh. There we go. California abortion ruling puts other states' laws in doubt. So, crisis pregnancy centers. They exist for the purpose of giving mothers an alternative to aborting their unborn child, right? To support the mother in the birth of their child and to help both after the child's birth, right? So far, so good. In other words, they do the work of Jehoshaphat, seeking to save babies from the slaughter. It was not enough for Kamala Harris, as California Attorney General, that abortion was legal and widely practiced. The fact that some babies were being saved from abortion in crisis pregnancy centers was too much. Therefore, she launched a legal war against them. She would use her office and the machinery of state to restrain and encumber them, to weigh them down. It was unprecedented. It opened the door for similarly pro-abortion members of government in other states to wage similar wars against crisis pregnancy centers across the nation. So those who were pro-abortion were against these crisis pregnancy centers that were helping moms and babies. In her zeal, Harris would go further. She ordered that every crisis pregnancy center in the state be compelled to post signs advertising abortion clinics. She was in effect attempting to force pro-life centers and ministries to direct their people to get abortions. So radical and brazen was her act. It was overruled by the Supreme Court itself, and that's what this is referring to. So Supreme Court sided with the anti-abortion groups and said, no, that's too much. And so it was a fulfillment of Athaliah's template. It was the children of Athaliah who sought to take the vessels from God's house and repurpose them for the purposes of Baal, or in other words, to take that which was devoted to the purposes of God and redirect it for the purposes of death, the child sacrifices of Baal. So Harris was seeking to take that which was dedicated to saving the lives of children and repurpose it for death. So in the murdering babies mindset, Kamala Harris fulfilled the template of Athaliah by not leaving pregnancy crisis centers alone, but trying to impose and force them to advertise for abortions, to promote more abortions. So do y'all remember that, or any thoughts or comments on that event and that time frame? By the way, this was June 26th of 2018 that she initially launched this. But any thoughts or reactions on this concept here and what was happening? Yeah, no bueno. So thank God it was turned over by the Supreme Court. Speaking of the Supreme Court, this will be a little review here. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy mentioned that he was going to be stepping down, and I get a kick out of this headline. For the first time, conservatives might thank God for Anthony Kennedy. He was considered a moderate on the court, but he pretty much voted with the liberal wing, especially in... Oh, wow. And especially with the abortion cases that came to the Supreme Court and all that stuff. So it was one thing when Neil Gorsuch took the spot that Antonin Scalia had, because they were of the same approach. Here, this guy's a moderate and often voting with the liberal wing on the social issues. And so now it gets a little more contentious. Now, remember the Ford Kavanaugh hearings that took place? So here we are now in September of 2018, where he was accused, as he's Trump's nominee, and so a conservative judge replacing a moderate liberal judge. Everyone freaked out, everyone's panicking about abortion. In fact, his accuser here actually said later that she was really just trying to save abortion and trying to stop and derail his nomination to the Supreme Court. So all that chaos was happening in September of 2018. But here's what else happened in September of 2018. While these hearings were going on, all this uproar over the underlying issue was abortion here. While that was going on, what was happening in Washington? We showed an event that happened in New York City. Well, this item went on tour and made its way to D.C. What item is this, you may ask? It is, hold your suspense. I think we can get it. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. The Arch of Baal. Hooray for the Arch of Baal. Yes, the god Baal. Just look at that picture. Here is the Arch of Baal at the U.S. Capitol. Baal, false god, along with Moloch, child sacrifice and all this. This was the entry to the walkway to the temple of Baal, all that stuff. So while this is being celebrated, first in New York, the abortion capital of America, now here at D.C., while this fight over abortion is happening in relation to the Supreme Court, at the Capitol, here we are celebrating a temple to Baal. Yeah, you can't make this stuff up, right? So we talked about that stuff at the time, but yeah, that was happening. So there was that. So that was September 26th. Now we get to another event in the avatar here. So let's go to this thought. So now we arrive at October 10th of 2018. What was in the news? What was the headline from October 10th of 2018? So here's the idea. So we mentioned before Jezebel and her witchcraft that Jehu was speaking against. And so those on the side of witchcraft were not on the same side as Jehu. And how in modern times Donald Trump was following the template of Jehu. So Jehu warred not only against the house of Ahab, but against witchcraft, pagan practices championed by Jezebel. The witches of the land would have seen Jehu as their enemy. They would have undoubtedly sought to employ everything in their arsenal against him, to cast their spells and issue their curses. One would not expect witches to be an issue in modern American presidency, but witches played a part in the ancient template. So is it possible that the mystery of Jehu would ordain that the rise of the American Jehu would be accompanied by the work of witches? The answer is strangely yes. As Jehu and the witches of the land stood as enemies on opposite sides of the ancient culture war, so the American Jehu, his rise to the presidency, was warred against, not only by political and cultural enemies, but by witches. It was a sign of the times. As America fell away from God, it fell increasingly to the dark side. As it became empty of the things of the Spirit, it opened itself to the spirits of another kind. The number of witches in America exploded. Here we are, surpassing, yes, verify me, I'm here, I'm me, yes, yes. And here's the headline, yes, yeah, lock, go away. So here's the headline. Witches outnumber Presbyterians in the United States. Wicca, paganism are growing astronomically. That's a real headline, and the numbers don't lie. So Presbyterians are outnumbered by witches in America as of October 10th, 2018. Believe it or not. So thoughts, comments, reactions on that. It's kind of one of the things where I've said that the closer things get, the more masks are coming off, and while people might be going along to get along at some point, eventually true colors will show and masks will be off, and true motives will be revealed. And so we see people aren't afraid or ashamed to say, yeah, I'm a witch and I'm anti-God and all that stuff. And here we go. So some crazy times, eh? So let's see. Then we have 2019, January 22nd. We have the celebration in New York. The celebration of passing a bill. That celebration is for the Reproductive Health Act, which allows abortion up to birth. And so New York was all excited about that. That happened on January 22nd, which is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade and all of that stuff, allowing abortion up to birth for any reason, by the way. And New York was so happy about this that same day, yes, security validation, verification, that they lit up the World Trade Center pink in celebration of abortion up to birth for any reason. Hooray, right? So that happened, and that's some review from before. But that brings us to, let's see, our new item here. So Kamala Harris goes from the Attorney General to now she's a senator. Well, on the same topic, the Senate takes a vote. And this vote is on this topic here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. And we'll end this here and then close with our final scripture. So, what's it say? And this is from the government website. On cloture on the motion to proceed, here's the measure title. A bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to prohibit a healthcare practitioner from failing to exercise the proper degree of care in the case of a child who survives an abortion or attempted abortion. Basically, doctors would be required to give care to a child that survives abortion. So the Senate voted about that. Let's see, we'll go down here. Right here, here's the vote of Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris voted nay. Kamala Harris in the Senate voted against doctors being required to care for a child that survives abortion. That's pretty not cool. So that's where things are going on that side of things, and that was February 25th of 2019. We'll go on from there and see the Jehu rise countering all of this stuff as we go, so there'll be more good news on that side as we go. But just as these things were increasing and happening in America, as we're going back and reviewing these things that we lived through and experienced, does anyone have any reactions, thoughts, comments, questions? Kind of remember some of this stuff, or just the fact that our nation was actually going this far to where these things were mainstream happening? Fortunately, this got voted contrary to her, and this passed to where the doctors would be required to give that care, but she was not in favor of that care. So, crazy stuff, huh?
Well, it makes me wonder, how many of these people have their own children and grandchildren, but vote yes to have abortion, do they ever think about how that would affect them if their own family members did that?
I believe it was Ronald's sister, Leslie, asked, well, these people have kids and grandkids of their own. Do they not see of life value, of quality here or something, as I'm understanding your point? I believe it was Ronald Reagan, I'm sure others have said it too, who made the observation, everyone who's pro-abortion has the benefit of already being born.
Mm-hmm. And well, your mother let you be alive.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of a contradiction right then and there. So that's a very good point, Sister Leslie. Appreciate that very much.
I think where's their heart? I mean,
yeah, there's a disconnect.
But yeah, where's their heart?
It's a disconnect, it's a dehumanization, and it's a spiritual blindness. And for too many, it's a willful one. And so that is sadly the case. But as we see, the tide has turned and we've gone in a different direction from where we were going. More on that as we continue. But let's close on a happy note, so we'll stop the share there. And let's close in Scripture. Let's go to Genesis again, this time chapter 32. Genesis 32. Let's look at picking up in verse 24. So we made reference to this, Jacob wrestling the angel of the Lord. Let's take a quick look. Genesis 32:24, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have contended with God and men and have prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. So closing thought on that passage, Jacob and wrestling and striving with God here, and going from Jacob to Israel, and naming the place Peniel. So, Jacob was alone, man wrestled with him until the breaking of dawn. The man asked his name, Jacob, says, you're now going to be Israel, you've struggled, and that's how the name Israel came about. The name of God's people and nation. It all came from a wrestling match. But the man who wrestled with Jacob wasn't just any man. Jacob would call the ground on which it all took place Peniel, which means the face of God. He had seen God face to face. What happened that night was a prophecy. No nation has ever wrestled with God and man in the world as has the nation of Israel. In that wrestling match is contained the mystery of the Jewish people. They're called Israel because they wrestled with the man who turned out to be God. That's their prophecy. So they've wrestled for ages with one particular man whose name means Messiah, and who in the end turned out to be God. But they aren't the only wrestlers. Scriptures say everyone who is born again becomes a citizen of Israel. And I will disagree with him there, and I'll talk about this for a moment. Basically, as Jacob didn't realize that was God he was wrestling with, so Israel doesn't realize in denying the Messiah that it's God they're wrestling with in not recognizing Jesus as God, as the Messiah. And so I respectfully disagree with Jonathan Cahn on his point here. Everyone who's born again becomes a citizen of Israel. No, it's the difference between being saved and then being baptized into the covenant relationship. Not everyone who's saved is part of that covenant relationship. It's those who are baptized, who have clothed themselves with Christ and become spiritual Israel. So it's an important distinction. Generic Christianity at large often lumps those together. So it's not a bad thing to wrestle, even with God, as long as you come to the point that Jacob came to the end of your strength, where you can do nothing else but cling to him and ask him to bless you. That's how most come to the kingdom, at the end of a wrestling match. We talked a lot about this at church camp last year amongst the men, the preachers and pastors, as we're praying at the altar for kids who are wanting to be saved, but it's not automatically happening. Sometimes for some it's a struggle. God's taking them through a process. He's not keeping them dangling, but he's working them through. He's allowing them to go through a process. He's with them all the way, and he's going to honor them, but they have to get to a point where it's just a complete surrender and a complete trust and a complete assurance that God has them and has received them and is then carrying them the rest of the way. How many times do we have to go through that same wrestling with God to get through something to the other side of it? So they become his people Israel at the end of the night, at the breaking of the dawn, when that all comes through. So interesting concept there about the wrestling and the surrender and the realization. Any reactions or thoughts on that before we call it an evening? I've had my similar wrestling experiences with God, so I know what that's like. But he's always been faithful and gracious during it all. So with that, if nothing else from anyone else, let's stand, get ready to meet in the center, and close out in our season of prayer together. And I thank you for your time and enjoy the different things we've discussed this evening together.